Hey everybody, Coldon here with another VOX Immortalis commentary guide. This video is for Heroic Morchok in Dragon Soul, and this is 10 man. So, on Heroic, Morchok decides at about 90% health that he's tired of your shenanigans and splits off into two mobs, original Morchok and his reverse twin brother Kokrom. So you see him splitting there. But from this point forward, your raid makeup and overall strategy really dictate how you'll handle things. So there are a few valid strategies that many guilds are using, and I'll talk about the few that we tried and the pros and cons of those, and then I'll get around to the actual method that we're using within the video here that you can see how we got the kill. So the first common strategy is to use 3 healers, 2 tanks, 5 DPS. And we tried this for a while. And with that sort of setup, you basically have your tanks move the bosses when they spawn about 45 yards apart or so, so that your tanks can then position themselves on the inside of both bosses. So basically their backs to each other with the bosses on the outside. The tanks should then be about 35 or 38 yards apart, just far enough that a healer that is on the side of Morchok, for example, will be able to heal the tank on the other side where Kokrom is hanging out, and vice versa. The distance between the two bosses, if it's far enough, around 30 or 40 yards or more, will then prevent the 25-yard radius of stomp from hitting the opposite group, as long as they're not too close. So this is the key if you're using this 3 healer setup. If you do it properly, you can basically have the Morchok healer focus on Morchok's group, Kokrom healer focus on Kokrom's group, and then the third healer can cross heal, so either focus on, say, the tanks, or just cross heal and spot heal where needed. And this offers a lot of stability. As far as healing per second for this fight requirements, I think 3 healers is pretty standard, and at least at this gear level, what should be considered the norm. The problem is that the mechanics make this sort of difficult to do and kind of a pain in the neck. So the issue we found with the 3 healer setup is that often the crystal from a particular boss will spawn more than 25 yards away from it, so that the people that are soaking the crystal damage, when they have to stand right on top of the crystal, they're out of 25-yard radius of Kokrom, and thus they don't help soak up the stomp damage. This just one-shots your tank and or your other soaker, and you die. So your tank either has to move closer to the crystal so that the stomp helps or is soaked by 5 people, or your soakers for the crystal have to wait for the stomp to go off and then make a beeline to the crystal and get right on top of it within about 6 seconds. It's a very short time window, especially if it's far away. So either one of those will work, but it's probably better if your tanks can remain stationary if you're using that 3 heal setup. Otherwise, the tanks are just going to get out of range, as will most of the group, and you'll just have, cross healing issues and sort of ruin the point of 3 healers. So we found both of those were more problem than they were worth. So the strategy we actually spent most of our time on was 2 healers, 2 tanks, and 6 DPS. And so with that method, you basically split the raid into 2 even groups of 5 players. So 1 tank, 1 heal, 3 DPS on each. Sort of like you're seeing right now. And then you split the mobs far enough that there's no crossover at all. But this means that crystals are never an issue, stomps to the other side are never an issue, anything like that. The downside, of course, is that you only have 1 healer on each side. And this can be extremely difficult, at least with the current level of gear, to put out the necessary healing per second to deal with the damage. I found as a druid healer that even when I'm fully prepared for what's happening and pre-hotting everyone, unless there was cooldowns available, often I wouldn't be able to put out the actual healing per second required to basically handle the damage that was happening. And this is specifically when a stomp occurs from your mob, and then 6 seconds later, the crystal explodes as well. Because of the damage from the crystal, you you have that 6-second window to heal up the minimum damage on the 3 crystal soakers, as well as, of course, keep your tank alive. And so that's around 245, 250,000 for the crystal soakers, plus whatever your tank is taking in 6 seconds. And just as a hot user, I just found I often was right on the edge of whether I could do that or not without cooldowns of some sort. So to be fair, our Holy Paladin did better job on his side than I was able to do for that. But either way, we were both having issues every once in a while, and it was not stable at all. So ultimately, we went with another common strategy which feels really silly and goofy, but works really well right now. And that's simply to use 4 healers and 2 tanks and 4 DPS. And that is the method you see in the video here and the way we got our kill. So with this method, it's similar to the 2 healer setup, except when you split off into groups of 5, you have 2 healers instead of 1. The obvious problem is that your raid needs to have access to 4 capable healers. You don't have to have really strong healers by any means. Like 1 strong and 1 mediocre healer is plenty, or 2, average healers, whatever it might be. Just as long as you have the backup for when things are, dicey. That's what matters. So as we loop back around, I'll go through the actual mechanics here and, how we're dealing with those with our 4 healer setup. So once you hit 90% and Morchok splits, make sure your groups of 5 are already assigned to which side they're going to go to, and therefore which boss they're going to attack. So my group 1, we're on Kokrom, which is on the blue side here, as you see. And so the tanks need to immediately move them far away. And this prevents, hopefully, crystals from being too close to the other boss and getting them within stomp range of the opposite boss. The stomp itself has a debuff mechanic. So basically, for 10 seconds after stomp, you'll take extra damage from a future stomp. And this sort of prevents you from tanking both the bosses within 25 yards of each other. You could theoretically do it if you had enough healing, but it'd be insane. I would not try it. So once you're in position, then you get into this sort of rhythm where you're dealing with either a crystal on your side, shortly followed by a stomp, and then the crystal explosion, or you're waiting for one of those to happen. So the crystal spawns always occur every 15 seconds from a particular boss once it starts. But the pattern is actually not random. So when they first split off, the first crystal always comes from Morchok. Second crystal is also Morchok. And then the third crystal is Kokrom. After that third crystal explodes, then you'll go into the first Black Blood phase. After the intermission phase, you get 5 crystals this time. And this pattern continues for the rest of the fight. So the first 2 are Morchok, again, right in a row. Then Kokrom, then Morchok, then Kokrom. So this means the Morchok group will take slightly more damage from the crystal, specifically on that double crystal in a row. But later on, you will get double crystals from the Kokrom group, but you only get the 2 in total from that group. So just something to keep in mind. The other major factor is that as I mentioned before, the timing of crystals and stomp is very important. So when a crystal spawns from a particular boss, in this case Kokrom, that boss will stomp 6 seconds after the crystal spawns, and then 6 seconds after that stomp occurs, the crystal will explode. So what this means is you have, as I mentioned, that 6-second window in which to heal up the players that took stomp damage that are going to soak up that crystal. And you have to keep them at a certain health level. So if you are doing the crystal properly, you'll want to be right on top of it. And the 3 people assigned to soaking it should all get a buff called safe if they're right on top of the crystal. If you have that buff called safe, when it explodes, it will do 83,000 shadow damage before mitigation or resist. However, if you're slightly too far away from it, you'll have a buff called warning. And when the crystal explodes when you have warning, you'll take 150,000 shadow damage. So obviously a huge jump, and this will be very hard to survive or heal up. That said, as I mentioned, you need to ensure that the players that are going to the crystal are going to soak up the stomp that occurs 6 seconds prior to the explosion. So the best strategy we found was to have our tanks follow the crystal as soon as it spawns. So here you see the crystals appeared and our tank moves Kokram over. So this way, when that stomp occurs before the crystal explosion, everyone's within 25 yards and they help soak it up. And then you heal them back up before the crystal explodes. And as long as those 3 people in the crystal are above 83,000, they'll survive. And then you'll have 6 seconds to heal up after that for the next stomp, and sort of repeats. So the other major thing is that just like on normal, these stomps also split damage among the people that are soaking it. So it should be 5 people in this sort of setup. And it's 750,000 physical damage, split 5 ways, so 150 each. But the 2 closest players to one of the bosses will take double the damage, so 300,000 before mitigation. So one of those players should always be your tank for obvious reasons. But the other person is very important. And at the current levels of gear, if you're trying heroics right now, some classes simply won't have enough health or stamina to survive that damage without cooldowns. So I encourage you to experiment and see what your raid can come up with as far as who can soak it. We found that Shadow Priest worked really well. Rogue actually worked quite well, believe it or not. I imagine, like a Death Knight DPS, that especially if they went Blood Presence before the stomp, or Feral Druid DPS that went Bear, that kind of thing. But some classes just don't have enough mitigation and health, along with their armor, of course, to soak that extra damage. So here we're using a Paladin and a Rogue for that extra soak, and everyone else is on Crystal. And the other side, our tank and our Holy Paladin healer are doing the extra stomp damage on their side. So, yeah, it's a bizarre fight if you do it with 4 healers, but like I said, the stability is there. So if you can afford it, I would try that. And I think that's about everything. Oh, the Black Blood phase, actually. So not much to say about it. It's just like the normal version. So just, you get stunned, you take a little bit of damage, and run out, hide behind the rocks there. And of course, range DPS, if they get a good angle, they can get out of the blood but still attack. And I think that's about it. So that's Heroic Morchok. Good luck, and thanks for watching.